I'm going to tell you some specific things that you can do that are going to raise your average sale price, help you find better items, and make more money on the stuff that you brought home. And my last tip is going to be specific to you, and it's going to help you be better at this entire thing. One of the first categories I want to talk to you about is vintage sportswear. Let's look first at a jersey that I picked up. And jerseys as a whole are great sellers. And you pick up vintage jerseys, a lot of times they're, $20, $30, $40, even $50. But what I want you to do is while you're picking those up, I want you to find the ones that can really break the top off of this thing. For example, this Atlanta Braves jersey that I picked up had some key indicators that it was more than just a vintage jersey. So let's take a close look at the label. When you see labels like this, where there are other numbers inside, especially if they have chain stitch embroidery, there's a chance that those jerseys are what they call game-worn jerseys or team-issued jerseys. In other words, they actually belong to a player. When you can show that, like on this jersey, I show the jersey on the player. I have the player's number, and I was able to offer a little provenance with it. The jersey goes from being worth maybe $50 or even $100 to $800. It's sold in less than a day. When you're looking at vintage sportswear, always keep your eyes open for anything that would indicate that it was team issued, because when it's team issued, the price rises dramatically. What I want to do in the rest of these categories is tell you what categories to pick in, sure, but I also want you to know one or two key things that you can look for while you're out picking these things that will help you find those rare items that really raise the value and just add to your bottom line. So let's keep going. One of our favorite things to pick up is watches. Watches always sell. There are a few items that you can look for in watches that are going to really pass up that $20 ranking. For example, this is a Seiko watch I sold, but it was made in Japan. So when you're looking, especially at Seiko, when you're looking at watches, look for made in Japan first. They have numbers on the back of them that will help you date them and help you figure out exactly what they are. With watches, especially if it's a vintage watch, you want to look and see those numbers and see if you can identify that exact same one. Also, another key indicator on watches that could drastically raise the value is the word automatic. We picked up, and I've told the story before, but Melody found a margarine tub of watches that she paid $1 for. They were automatic Seiko watches from the late 60s, and we cleared $3,300 within one day on 4 broken watches. But they were all automatics. They were all made in Japan. And so those are things that you can do while you're out picking up watches. Always take a look at them. Keep your eyes open for the word automatic. Keep your eyes out for the ones that are made in Japan. And always, if there's numbers on the back of them and it looks a little bit more rare to you or has a really good feel, look that number up online and make sure you're not holding something that's special. All right, I want to talk about some vintage clothing. Specifically, let's talk about coveralls. Farm wear is super, super hot right now. So even if you're just picking up regular 2000s Carhartt coveralls or overalls, those things are going to sell. But what I want to do is help you find the coveralls that are going to really raise that price up. And there are a few things that you can look for on coveralls that are going to make them drastically more valuable. For example, I want you to look at these coveralls that I found. And these were in an open shed and worn out, full of holes. And from the front, initially, they just look like old blue coveralls. But there were a few indicators that these might actually be really old. Not just coveralls, but any vintage clothing. First thing I want you to check, make sure it doesn't have a Talon zipper on it. Talon. A Talon zipper helps date it, and it's a high quality zipper, which means it was probably a pretty good item when it was made. The other thing to look for, of course, is made in the USA. And if the item is made in the USA, it's probably a little bit older. When I flipped these coveralls on the back, they had chain stitch embroidery. And I'll try and zoom in so you can see exactly what chain stitch is. But chain stitch embroidery is an expensive type of embroidery. They still do it on things like FFA jackets, but it was much more popular way back in the day. So these coveralls ended up dating to the 1930s, and a pair of coveralls brought $560. What I want you to be able to do is to look at old farm wear, old mechanics wear, and that kind of stuff. And because all of it is pretty valuable, all of it sells pretty well for us, but to be able to know that, hey, I might have something special because it's got a few of these things. Because it's great to get a sale and it's $30. It's even better when mixed in with those regular bread and butter sales, you can pop off with something that's worth $500. I want to talk to you a little bit about military items. I'm going to talk in this section, let's talk about things other than clothing. For example, I have an altimeter here that would have dated to about the 1940s, and it came right out of the dash. Obviously, they're very rare, not many of them survived, and when you have one in good condition, and believe it or not, this one actually worked. I don't know how accurate it was, but it did work, it did function. Something like this, easily $100, but could go for much, much more depending upon exactly what you found. And a lot of the military items like this are also very, very easy to date. If it's US, you can look up, a lot of them will have a contract number on those, or they'll have some other number indicating exactly when it was made. Makes them easy to look up. So when you're looking at military ephemera, military hardware, date it if you can, assign it to a conflict if you can, and if you can assign it to a specific person, a specific soldier, a specific pilot, the value increases drastically. So always watch for military stuff. Military stuff is so easy to sell, but watch for specific things that are going to raise the value up. So this flows right into military clothing. And I know much more about military clothing within the US than I do from outside the US, but there are a few things in military clothing in the US that can really help you identify exactly what you have. So let's talk about what that is. First of all, military clothing sells great, and not just to military people. Even the modern stuff that doesn't bring a whole lot usually sells very quick, especially if you have anything that's new with tags. I don't ever keep that stuff around. It all sells. But military clothing is pretty easy to date, especially when we start talking about vintage military clothing. So they will a lot of times have a DSA or a DLA number followed by either a 100 and then 2 digits or just 2 digits. And the 2 digits are usually the year. A lot of times it's just that simple. There are other things to know that might make it more valuable when you're out looking at things. Let's say you come across an old military jacket. You know it's an old military jacket. You don't really know what it is. If you can identify the service, for example, if it's painted on the back and it's a Navy jacket, well, here's the thing. Army jackets were assigned to a soldier. Navy jackets were assigned to a boat, and they didn't leave. So they're much more rare as a survivor. So when you find a Navy deck jacket, it's going to have some really, really good value. Knowing just a few things about military items, like being able to put a date on it, can really raise your value a whole lot. Also, patterns change, colors change. For example, they've gone through several iterations of green. OG 107, olive green 107 is a very popular color. When you can learn just the basics of what colors were sold, like digital camo, that's not going to be from the 50s. They didn't have digital camo. I found a Mitchell jacket, an actual Mitchell M65 jacket. And that's exceptionally rare and sold for well over $1,000. Just knowing just a little bit makes you really dangerous when you're out and about. All right, let's keep going. One of the things that you need to get out of this video is I didn't find 500 rare pieces last year. I found a ton of stuff. I sold a ton of stuff. I actually have a handful of rare items that make up a significant portion of my overall income because of their extreme value. This video isn't about finding tons and tons of stuff. It's about when you're finding tons and tons of stuff, how can you cherry pick out of that and really maximize your profit on just a few items? Because just a few items can make a colossal difference in your overall income. We buy a ton of vintage clothes. Most vintage clothes, again, are going to be in that $20, $30, $40 range. which is great money when most of them can be bought for a few dollars. With vintage clothing, it is really worth your time to get to where you recognize those few items that can run the price up a great deal. I'm going to scroll a few brands that you really should watch for, especially in the vintage clothing market. And I'm speaking specifically about women's vintage clothing because it can make a drastic difference in what you're making overall. And so one of our favorites, gunny sacks. I pick up every gunny sacks that I can find. You're specifically looking for quality, condition, are they made in the USA, other indications that it's got some age to it. And a lot of times with Google Lens, you can find the exact same pattern because on a lot of these, especially if they're very popular, they will have a name that everybody calls it. Knowing the name of a specific item can raise your price. All right, let's keep going. I want to talk to you about a couple of tech things. Full disclosure, I don't like selling electronics. I sell very few electronics, but there are some that I know well enough that I can sell and take advantage of the market. For example, vintage computers. They don't seem vintage to me because I was on them when they weren't vintage, so they just seem old. But I know enough about them to be able to recognize them. This computer picked up at a private pick. They're throwing everything away, and I was able to take this thing home, this old Tandy, and it fired up, worked, ran, cleaned it up, and again, not huge money, but hundreds and hundreds of dollars. One of the things to remember about tech is if you're selling a modern iPhone, man, there are scammers everywhere, and it's hard to sell that kind of stuff without getting taken advantage of. The vintage computer market is a completely different customer. I have never sold a vintage computer or sold a vintage keyboard and had somebody take advantage of me. Not one time. Which leads to the second part of the vintage tech, are keyboards. Specifically, these are going to be called clicky keyboards, and you might be able to hear it when you click down on it. IBM Model M is a very popular one. I've probably sold 100 with my son. We restore a lot of them and sell them. But if you can get a Model S, or some of them called like the Battleship or the Space Saver, we're talking keyboards that are worth hundreds of dollars. And while there are not many out there, it's not impossible that you could find one in the box that never got used. And if you do, you're going to be talking thousands of dollars from people that are going to fight over it who aren't going to rip you off. Most likely, they're going to be people that are serious collectors and they just want that item. Let's head into the kitchen. And I hate kitchenware. I don't sell a lot of kitchenware. I know a little bit about it. I don't sell mugs. I don't sell a lot of glass. There are exceptions to this. For example, one of the things that I hate about shipping pots and pans is they take up so much room. But an exception to that would be like kitchen craft. I sold a lot of kitchen craft this year. And when I find the vintage kitchen craft in good condition, I won't pick it up every single time. The handles come off and fit inside the pan or the bowl. They're easy to wrap. Huge following. It's almost always going to be $100 bill for one of them if you get it in decent shape. I don't pick up pots and pans everywhere I go, but I do watch for high quality. I do watch for things that will be easy to ship. Kitchen craft, I don't have to worry about storing it because it's not going to be listed very long before I get it sold. Also in the kitchen, when you start talking some of the vintage items, just knowing that it's valuable can raise your price. Here's a set of bowls I picked up. And when you see vintage Pyrex, it's always worth looking up the price. If you get a whole set, the price goes up. If it's in good shape, the price goes up. If it's a rare pattern, the price can get stupid, like in the tens of thousands of dollars. So while I hate kitchen stuff and I hate shipping glass, some of it, if I found one of them that's worth $30,000, I will just drive it to them. Like, here I come, Maine. I'll bring that to you. So don't let shipping scare you away if the item is worth a ridiculous amount of money. Being able to identify that it's something special is the key. Along that same vein, something really easy to ship is something like Texas ware, confetti ware. You're going to see they're melamine, and these were really popular in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. And the splattered one, the confetti look, those sell for me almost immediately, just about as fast as I can get them. And I'm normally talking $40 to $60 for a single bowl. Hate kitchenware? It's a great category for specific items when you're really wanting to bump that average sale price up. All right, next category, dolls. Dolls have plummeted in price in the last 10 years. Dolls that used to be worth $20,000 are worth a tenth of that. Some items that used to be so incredibly collectible have just fallen off the map. But here's what I want you to remember. If you know what to look for, something that has completely crumbled in price may still be worth a ton of money. For example, this is some fencing that I picked up for a fancy Victorian dollhouse. I am sure that this stuff was from the 1800s, and when I picked it up because I could see the age, and I could see that this was a quality product. This wasn't just wire. There was something, it was special. You could just tell. I have no interest in dolls or building a dollhouse, but I was like, this is pretty neat. And when I went to looking, nobody had a set as good. Nobody. So I listed it high. It sat around for a while, but eventually almost $300 for something that I picked up for a few bucks. The other thing to look for are dolls that they just don't make anymore. You don't see a lot of topsy-turvy dolls. The dolls that are a character on one side and you flip it over, the dress falls down, it's a different character on the other side. I've sold several of these. I always look at topsy-turvy dolls when I find them because they can easily go for 50 bucks. Some of them are worth several hundred. And we sold a couple this year that passed the $100 mark. Also in the dolls, you want to take a look at things that fall so far outside the normal that you've never seen, and if you can still get them for a great price, they might be worth picking up. An example for me for this last year is this Jack-in-the-Box that we sold. When out of the box, he didn't pop up, but when you pulled him out, I think his name was Grimly, when you pulled Grimly all the way up, he stood almost 7 feet tall. And the quality of the build was obviously something different. It was obviously something special. And he sold for hundreds of dollars and still fit inside of his box that was like 14 by 14, really easy to ship. But what I'm looking for are the ones that were more rare to begin with. They're old enough that not many have survived, or like the fencing, accessories. So accessories are always going to be a thing to look at in the doll category. Keep your eyes open for that one piece that looks special and spend some time looking that up. And if you can't find it anywhere and you can get it for a reasonable price, because that's what happened with me with the fencing, then that's probably worth taking home and putting a little bit into and then waiting for the right buyer. All right, so let's jump into boys' toys. For the most part, boys' toys go up in value more, and let me tell you why. If a boy had a Stretch Armstrong when I was a kid, at some point, we would see how far he would stretch. We broke them. We broke them all. And at some point, we lit our toys on fire. We put them in anthills and put firecrackers in them. And because a lot of these toys got played with pretty hard, condition makes all the difference in the world. And so when you find things that are in great condition, that will raise the value. We sold a Hot Wheels car it was a red line. Again, just like the girls' toys, age and condition matter. With toys that were initially targeted and aimed at boys, a lot of those were toys that got played with a lot rougher, whether by boys or girls. And, if you had army men, you were fighting with army men. You can make a ton of money picking up great condition toys for boys or girls and reselling them. You just can. But if you can find that one piece, like in this whole box of Hot Wheels, and you've got the one that's an actual red line from the late 60s, you're going to make more probably on the one car than you make on the rest of the collection that you bought. I want to talk to you a little bit about artwork. And I'm going to throw folk art in with this. For example, here's a piece that was done oil on paper attached to burlap. It was a Mexican artist that had done it. It had a really, really just a spectacular late 60s, early 70s feel to it. And this piece sold, not a really valuable piece, but for, like 150 bucks. Being able to identify something that has more value requires a few things. It can't be mass produced. Mass produced artwork rarely goes up in value. I want something that hopefully is signed and has some sort of flavor to it. It's not generic. Also in that same vein is folk art. Folk art has come on really strong in the last 4 or 5 years. Here is a shed that I had from an artist named Alex Nakori. He was an Alaskan who did folk art. I want to talk about weights and measurements. And I want to talk about those tools that are used to do that. For example, calculator. Calculators, everything from like when you're picking up a TI-84 and you know you're going to make 40 to 60 bucks on it as fast as you can get it listed. I want you to grab all of that stuff that you can. Easy to look up. It's got a number on it. But it wasn't always done that way. Calculator is not a new word. It is not a word that only belongs to electronics. What we're looking at are old measuring devices. These are tools that were used. For example, this cylindrical slide rule, what I want you to look at, it's actually the coating on it. It's not porcelain. It's actually paper over wood. And being a cylindrical slide rule made it extremely accurate. So engineers would have used this for bearing loads for bridges and things like that. And extremely, extremely accurate. And the same way for the Stanley ruler, the Stanley calculator that I had. Again, a type of slide rule. Very, very handy for someone that knew how to use it. A lot of these are paper over wood, and condition matters as much as anything because paper dissolves. So you can tell by looking at these were in incredible condition. How rare is it? As soon as I saw these, like the Thacker calculator, I knew that I had never seen one in person before. So I immediately knew that this is worth looking up. And the age on it was obvious. One of them was dated. But the age was obvious. So it comes down to how easy is this going to be to display? How cool is this going to look in somebody's office? Because when it starts checking those boxes off, the price starts going up. When you start adding age to that and great condition and display value, the price starts rising a lot. One of the areas that you need to become familiar with when you're outsourcing is pop culture. What things were super popular at a given time? Because if those were things that were super popular, everybody remembers them, but they either got used up or destroyed or just didn't last because of what they were made of, and you find those things in good condition, the value can go up an awful lot. Even for those of you who aren't gamers, you probably have heard of the game Zelda. So when you find things from Zelda, they're worth looking up, plain and simple. But for example, here's a comic book from Zelda. I had an issue number 1, great condition, easily going to bring over $100. You'll remember things like Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of those things got used up. And when you can find the original Dungeons and Dragons magazine, the value skyrockets. Think of pop culture as all of the things that everybody remembers, something that was iconic, that it's really, really hard to find. For all of the people who loved it and had it as a kid, they'd be like, oh, wow, that would be cool to have. A lot of those items can blow past $100 and make you better at sourcing when you're out. I don't buy a ton of comic books. Most comic books are worth 50 cents or $1. But when I'm looking at those comic books, I start looking for things that I remember, not everybody has it, and I want one. And that I want one is going to bring me to the secret weapon for you when you are outsourcing. And it's going to tell you which one of these categories is best for you and where you can make the most money. There is going to be something that you know better than everybody else. You have a secret weapon. Whether that's you've spent your whole life sewing or quilting and you know that stuff really, really well, or you've spent your whole life painting and you know that stuff really, really well. I've spent my whole adult life woodworking. When I go into a place, I can identify the value in the woodworking stuff immediately, and I'm going to know the second I come across something that's actually valuable. My eBay store that I opened in '99 was originally old school woodworks, and all I sold was lumber and tools, and I bought lumber and tools. When I go into an estate sale or a garage sale or a private pick, if there's woodworking stuff there, I am not going to miss the real value. You know something about something. That is your secret weapon, and that's where to start. What do you know the most about? When you go out, you pick things that you know first. If you are an expert at something, and you probably are, then you start with that and expand from there. These items that I have added a ton of money to my overall income last year. They raised my average sale price. And so while I am picking up all the bread and butter stuff, just knowing a little bit about each one of these things makes you much more dangerous in this game. Truly appreciate you watching. I'm going to see you real soon on the next one. Bye.